We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
Two men, one crime scene, and a question that law enforcement has refused to answer out loud. Not because they don't have evidence, because they have too much. And it's pointing in a direction that nobody in this case is ready to say on the record. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what you're about to see. Because when you lay the physical evidence from the Nancy Guthrie disappearance side by side with the behavioral record of two specific men in Tucson, Arizona, the picture that forms is not a theory. It is a pattern. And patterns, unlike theories, don't go away when you stop looking at them. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit subscribe right now. Turn on the bell. Because this channel covers the cases the mainstream media circles around but never lands on. And if you've been following the Nancy Guthrie case, let's drop a number in the comments. 1, if you think one person did this. 2, if you think more than one person was involved. I want to see where this audience stands before I show you what I know. Let's start at the end, because in this case, the end is actually the beginning. March 2nd, 2025. 1 month after an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. A man named Tommaso Cioni walked out of silence and into a camera frame. He walked arm in arm with his wife Annie and sister-in-law Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American television, to a memorial that had grown outside Nancy's home. Yellow flowers, handwritten notes, a crowd of people grieving. And the internet did not look at the flowers, it looked at his walk. Because 4 weeks earlier, a man had walked across Nancy Guthrie's front porch at 1:47 in the morning. He moved with a specific gait, a shoulder pattern, a particular stride. And when Tommaso Cioni appeared publicly for the first time in almost a month, thousands of people pulled out their phones, opened 2 videos, and started watching them on loop. Now here is where most coverage stops. The walk comparison, the gait analysis, the TikTok overlay. This channel is not stopping there. Because the walk is not the evidence that should terrify the people responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie, the evidence that should terrify them is sitting in a forensic laboratory in Florida right now. 2 separate DNA profiles, 2 unknown males. Neither one matching Nancy, neither one matching her family. Neither one matching any of the 19 million offender profiles stored in the FBI's national database. 2 people left their biology at 2 separate locations connected to the same crime. That is not speculation, that is physical evidence. And everything else in this case, the 41 minutes, the disabled cameras, the silent ransom wallet, the glove found 2 miles away, everything looks different once you understand that this was not one person. This was a team. Stay with me. Because in the next 30 minutes, I am going to show you how this crime was built, who the evidence keeps circling, and why, after more than a month, 2 men who have known each other for 19 years have never once been named together by a single outlet in the way this evidence demands. Let's build the timeline from the ground up, not from February 1st, not from the weeks before it. January 11th, 2025. The Pima County Sheriff's Office flagged this date and sent a request for neighborhood surveillance footage. They never explained why publicly. That single detail, an unexplained date flag 3 weeks before the abduction, tells investigators something was happening in that neighborhood that caught official attention before any crime had been reported. A vehicle, a person, something that didn't fit. 12 days later, January 23rd, a figure appeared on a residential street 6.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. And what this person did next is one of the most forensically revealing behavioral details in this entire case. Details that have been mentioned in passing but never fully unpacked. He walked backward, not occasionally, consistently, and with purpose. Here's why that matters in a way most coverage hasn't explained. Consumer-grade security cameras, the Ring systems, the Nest doorbell cameras, the ones on every other house in suburban Tucson, don't run continuously. They operate on passive infrared motion detection. When your body heat crosses the sensor, it triggers the processor, which wakes the lens, which establishes a wireless handshake which begins recording. That sequence takes between 1 and 2 seconds. Walk toward a camera normally, and those first seconds capture your face as you approach. The highest resolution window, your features, your jawline, your eyes. Walk backward, and by the time the camera is recording, it has the back of a hood and the back of a neck. Nothing useful, nothing prosecutable. The person on January 23rd had studied how these cameras fail, and he was not avoiding the camera. He was exploiting its physics. And when a dog barked somewhere behind him, a sudden, unpredictable sound, he did not turn around. He suppressed a biological reflex that most humans cannot override under stress. He would rather stumble than give that lens a single usable frame of his face. That level of operational discipline does not come from instinct. It comes from rehearsal. 9 days later, that same discipline appeared on Nancy Guthrie's front porch. February 1st, 2025, 1:47 a.m. The doorbell camera went dark. Not because it stopped recording, it was already barely recording. Nancy's Nest system did not have an active cloud subscription. The cameras could detect motion and send alerts, but they were not continuously capturing footage. The FBI had to partner with Google to recover residual data from back-end servers. Think about what that means. The cameras looked real. They served as a deterrent to anyone who didn't know better. But to someone who had spent time in that house, someone who saw the camera week after week and knew Nancy had never paid for the subscription, those cameras were decorations. Someone knew those cameras were props, not from research, from familiarity. Now, let me tell you about the 41 minutes. Nancy's pacemaker maintained a Bluetooth connection to its monitoring device throughout the night. That connection disappeared at 2:28 a.m., 41 minutes after the doorbell camera went offline at 1:47 a.m. 41 minutes. Professional burglars work in 5-minute windows. 10 minutes inside a stranger's house is considered reckless by every forensic criminologist who has testified in court. 20 minutes invites catastrophic exposure. But 41 minutes, inside a home in a monitored residential community at 2 in the morning, that number tells you something that a stopwatch alone cannot. Whoever was in that house was not afraid of being there. They knew the layout. They moved without searching. They managed an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and existing medical conditions. A woman the sheriff described as sharp, alert, and of great sound mind. In complete darkness, without triggering any external alert, without disturbing any neighbor, and without leaving behind the kind of chaotic forensic trace that panic produces. Former FBI negotiator Chip Massey, speaking to reporters about this case, made a specific observation. Managing an elderly person in a high-stress situation while simultaneously handling operational logistics, the vehicle, the exit route, the timing, the equipment, requires a coordination that is extremely difficult to sustain alone. Psychomotor stress under those conditions degrades performance. Tasks get dropped. Evidence gets left. But 2 people divide the operational load. One manages Nancy. One manages the environment. One guides her through the house. One checks the perimeter. 41 minutes of controlled, methodical, evidence-aware work becomes plausible the moment you add a second set of hands. And here is what makes the 2-person framework not just logical, but necessary. The crime scene had 2 entry points, not 1. Fox News drone footage showed destroyed floodlights at the rear of the property, and the doorbell camera covered the front. If the camera disruption and the lighting disruption happen simultaneously, that is coordinated. 2 positions, 2 roles, pre-assigned. Because if one person is standing at the front touching the camera, they cannot simultaneously be at the rear destroying the exterior lights. 2 people, 2 tasks, 1 operation. Let me ask you something right now, while this is still building. Do you believe this was premeditated, planned weeks or months in advance? Or do you think something about this was improvised? Tell me in the comments. Your answer matters more than you think. Now I want to introduce you to a framework, not a theory. A framework built directly from the physical evidence. This crime required two specific types of capability. The first is informational, knowing where the cameras were, knowing they didn't actually record. Knowing the gate, the layout, the hallway, the bedroom, the medication, the pacemaker, the schedule of the family members, the exact weekend when Savannah Guthrie would be on the other side of the planet, covering the Winter Olympics for NBC. Olympic assignments are set months in advance. The person who knew that window was open, who knew that the family's most powerful member would be unreachable for days, didn't find that out from a Google search. They heard it mentioned in conversation, at a dinner table, in a house they had been walking through for 20 years. The second capability is operational, the willingness and experience to enter a home at 1:47 in the morning, control a physically vulnerable but mentally sharp 84-year-old woman, move through a dark house with professional composure, and remove a person without leaving fingerprints, without leaving a usable image, and without triggering a single neighbor call to 911. One person cannot be both of those things simultaneously from one location, but two people, one who never appears at the scene and one who arrives with a blueprint, can execute both with the kind of precision this crime demonstrated. The person who provides the blueprint, the insider, produces an alibi that consists of simply being home, not being anywhere suspicious. His value is entirely informational. He already knows everything the operative needs. He hands it over in advance and then he waits. That, forensically and behaviorally, is the architect, and the person who shows up at 1:47 a.m. and equipped with information an outsider couldn't obtain in weeks of surveillance. That person is the operative. Now, let me show you who the evidence has been circling since February 1st. Tommaso Cioni is 50 years old, born in Tuscany, Italy. He has been married to Annie Guthrie, Nancy's eldest daughter, since 2006. That is 20 years of access to that house. 20 years of walking through that gate, past those cameras, down that hallway. 20 years of Friday night dinners where family schedules, travel plans, and financial conversations happened naturally around a table where he was seated. He teaches advanced placement biology at a charter school in Tucson, college-level molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry. His students learn PCR amplification, the same polymerase chain reaction technique that forensic labs use to build usable DNA profiles from degraded samples. They learn gel electrophoresis, the separation method that creates the genetic banding patterns entered into the FBI's CODIS database. His students also learn how to handle biological specimens without contaminating them. They wear nitrile gloves every lab day. They learn what transfers between surfaces and what doesn't. They learn what forensic technicians look for and what they miss. One black nitrile glove was found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. It contained DNA from an unknown male. That profile does not match anyone in CODIS. Tommaso Cioni has no criminal record. His DNA is not in CODIS. If that glove belonged to him, the result would look exactly the way it currently looks. Unknown. No match. A dead end. But here's something about nitrile gloves that most people don't know, and a biology teacher would. They are rated for chemical resistance in laboratory environments. They are not rated for forensic evidence prevention under physical exertion. Micro tears form around the fingers during sustained gripping and lifting. Perspiration builds inside the glove within minutes of physical activity. If you are wearing nitrile gloves while physically handling, controlling, and transporting an 84-year-old woman across a dark house and into a waiting vehicle, biology finds a way through. A biology teacher would know that, which means a biology teacher would also know to dispose of those gloves the moment the operation ended. Not at the house. Miles away. In a location that wouldn't be searched. Someone found one anyway. And then there is the detail about what Tommaso did after February 1st. Or more precisely, almost what he didn't do. Every member of the Guthrie family went public with their grief immediately. Savannah Guthrie posted videos online, her voice breaking, begging for information, offering a $1 million reward. She said publicly that every hour had been agony. Nancy's other daughter, Cameron, recorded a video speaking directly to whoever had her mother. Annie, Tommaso's wife, cooperated with investigators and remained visible to the public. Tommaso Cioni did not post a statement. He did not appear in a video. He did not grant a single interview. He did not stand beside his wife during her most public moments of anguish and add his voice to hers. The man who drove Nancy Guthrie home on the last night she was seen alive, who walked her to her own front door at 9:50 p.m. and watched her go inside, went silent for nearly a month. Reporter Brian Anton told journalist Megan Kelly that Tommaso had not been publicly seen for close to a week at one point. Recognizable, bearded, gone. Let me ask you something direct. If the person you drove home 4 hours before she disappeared was missing, and the entire country was searching for her, and your wife was falling apart publicly, what would you do? You would not stop talking. You would not stop pleading. The grief would be impossible to contain. It would pour out of you in every direction because innocent people in that situation don't calculate their exposure. They just feel. Silence is not a symptom of grief. Now, silence is a decision, and decisions at that level are made on legal advice. He appeared for the first time on March 2nd, the 1-month anniversary of Nancy's disappearance. Carefully staged, walking arm in arm to a public memorial. No statement, no interview, just a walk. Federal agents had returned to Tommaso and Annie's home more than 5 times during that same window of his public silence. They removed items in brown paper bags, the type used to preserve biological evidence. Annie's vehicle was towed and impounded. Their septic tank was examined. Security cameras were removed from the property. You do not conduct that level of evidence collection at the home of someone you have cleared. The sheriff publicly stated that the family had been cleared, but federal agents are not the sheriff. And the evidence bags kept coming out of that house. Now I want to bring in the second name, because this is where the forensic picture becomes something that investigators have not yet spoken publicly about. But the public record has been quietly assembling for anyone paying close attention. Dominic Aaron Evans, 48 years old, elementary school teacher in the Tucson area, and for 19 years the drummer in a band called Early Black, alongside Tommaso Cioni on bass. They have been making music together since 2007. They met through classified ads. Cioni responded to a listing in the Tucson Weekly. Evans connected through Craigslist. In late 2009, they recorded their debut album at Loveland Studios in Tucson. 3 men in a room, choosing words to represent their collective creative identity. They named that album Life, Love, Love, Murder. I am not saying an album title is evidence. I am saying that when 3 adults choose a word together to represent something they built, that word came from somewhere inside each of them. Now look at the FBI's physical description of the suspect seen on Nancy Guthrie's porch. Male, 5'9" to 5'10". Average build, dark clothing, ski mask, nitrile gloves. An Ozark Trail backpack with reflective safety strips. Facial hair, a mustache or goatee visible beneath the lower edge of the mask. And former FBI profiler Jim Clemente identified what he believed was a marking or tattoo on the suspect's right wrist. Dominic Evans is approximately 5'9". Average build. He has been photographed publicly with a mustache and goatee. And performance footage from Early Black shows a visible marking on his right wrist, consistent with what Clemente described from the FBI footage. Every measurable data point in the FBI's physical description maps onto Dominic Aaron Evans. And unlike Tommaso Cioni, whose height was initially cited by online analysts as too tall for the suspect profile, Evans falls precisely within the stated range. The debate over whether Cioni could be the figure on the porch became, for many people, the argument that made a second person necessary. But on March 2nd, when Tommaso walked beside Savannah Guthrie at the memorial, and Savannah's height is publicly documented at 5'10", the footage told a story. He was not significantly taller than her. Several frame-by-frame analyses have placed him within a half inch, which would put Tommaso Cioni at approximately 5'9.5". inside the FBI's stated window, which means the height argument that appeared to separate him from the porch may not separate him at all, which opens two possibilities. Either Evans was the operative on the porch and Cioni was the architect who never left home, or Cioni was on the porch himself, and Evans played a different role entirely. Or both men were present, one at the front of the house, one waiting in a vehicle on a dark residential back road 6 minutes away. The evidence does not resolve that question yet, but the evidence does not eliminate either of them. Here's what the Puma County Judicial Database shows for Dominic Evans. Felony entries including burglary, robbery, theft, embezzlement, and DUI. Burglary is defined as unlawful entry into a structure with intent to commit a crime. Robbery is the taking of property from a person by force or threat of force. The specific skill set documented in that record, entry, confrontation, physical taking, maps with disturbing precision onto what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home. And here's the forensic detail that should make every person watching this sit up straight. Neither DNA profile from the Guthrie crime scene matched any of the 19 million offender profiles in CODIS. For someone with no criminal history, that simply means they've never been arrested for a qualifying offense. Expected, normal, but for someone with multiple felony convictions in Puma County, the absence from CODIS requires an explanation. Arizona's mandatory DNA collection laws have evolved over time. Why, if Evans's convictions occurred before mandatory submission requirements applied to his specific offense categories, or if his case is resolved through plea agreements that did not trigger DNA collection, he could carry multiple felony court entries while remaining forensically invisible to the FBI's national database. A criminal record, no DNA in the system. That combination, in the context of this case, is not an exoneration. It is a forensic gap that the evidence in this case fits into exactly. Evans told the New York Times that he met Nancy Guthrie once at an Easter egg hunt in 2011. He said he learned about her disappearance through Instagram and reached out to Tommaso Cioni privately to offer his support. Think about that sequence carefully. A national kidnapping case involving your bandmate's mother-in-law explodes across every news platform in America. Your first instinct is not to send a public message of support. It is to contact the man at the center of the storm through a private channel. That is either a friend reaching out during a crisis, or it is the first communication in a post-operational protocol. A status check wrapped in sympathy, sent through a channel that feels personal but leaves a metadata trail. Investigators don't need either man to admit anything about that message. They need the metadata, the timing relative to February 1st, whether the frequency of contact between these two men changed in the days before and after the abduction, whether the pattern of that communication tells a story that the content alone doesn't reveal. A.D. Evans said he spoke to investigators for 40 minutes and has not heard from them since. 40 minutes is a first contact interview. It is not a forensic investigation. And the fact that investigators have not returned does not mean they moved on. It may mean they are building something that does not require his cooperation. Cell tower records, purchase histories, vehicle tracking data, and the genetic genealogy work happening right now in that Florida laboratory. Now, the vehicle. Approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, on a residential back road called Camino Royale, a route that avoids every major monitored intersection between the Catalina Foothills neighborhood and the arterial roads leading out of Tucson, a couple named Elias and Danielle Stratagulius reviewed their Ring camera footage after watching news coverage of the disappearance. Their camera had captured 12 vehicles moving through between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st. One vehicle appeared at 2:36 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection at 2:28 a.m. NBC correspondent Liz Croit drove the route from Nancy's home to that camera location. The drive took 6 minutes. 2:28 plus 6 minutes of driving delivers a vehicle to that camera at 2:34. The footage shows it at 2:36, 2 minutes of margin. Like the exact amount of time you would need if the driver paused at the end of Nancy's street after leaving the property, checked the mirrors, removed a mask, confirmed the road was empty, before pulling on to Camino Royale. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Broen assessed the vehicle from the footage as a Kia Soul. The Puma County Sheriff confirmed to NBC that the timing places this vehicle within the active abduction window. The vehicle is, in the sheriff's own words, part of the active investigation. Here is the detail that should disturb everyone. The Strategoulias home sits outside the 2-mile canvas radius that law enforcement initially established around Nancy's home. Nobody from law enforcement knocked on their door. They came forward on their own. They checked their camera themselves. They brought that footage to investigators voluntarily, which means every other residential camera between 2 and 5 miles from Nancy's home, every ring, every nest, every Arlo on every porch along every back road in that radius may hold footage that was never requested because the canvas stopped too soon. The direction that vehicle was traveling matters enormously. South toward Interstate 19 and the town of Rio Rico, 60 miles from the Mexican border where some reports have connected Evans to a property. West toward the Tucson Marana area where Evans lives. North toward Oro Valley where Tommaso Cioni teaches. Each direction tells a completely different story. The FBI has the footage. The FBI knows the direction. They have not said publicly which way that car went. And I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because law enforcement agencies in high-profile cases do not withhold directional vehicle data by accident. They withhold it because releasing it would tell the suspect which way the investigation is moving. Let me walk you through the ransom demands because they contain language that has been largely overlooked. $6 million in Bitcoin. Not 5, not 10. Not a round number chosen by someone who read about Savannah Guthrie's wealth in a headline. $6 million is a surgical figure. It reflects an understanding of the difference between what someone is worth on paper and what they can actually access in liquid assets. Quickly, quietly, and without triggering financial reporting requirements. A stranger making a ransom demand picks a number that feels large and dramatic. An insider picks the number that is actually achievable. 6 million says, I know your income, I know your accounts. I have been sitting across from you at dinner for 20 years. The Bitcoin wallet the FBI identified has not seen a single transaction since the moment of its creation. The Bureau sent a small test transfer as a forensic trap. Nothing moved, no one has touched it. If the money was ever the point, someone would have accessed it. The silence of that wallet, maintained through weeks of pressure, through a $1 million reward announcement, through escalating FBI involvement, confirms what the untouched medication on Nancy's kitchen counter already established. The ransom was never meant to be collected. It was a narrative prop, a signal pointing investigators toward financial motive, while the actual motive existed somewhere entirely different. And buried inside one of the ransom communications was a phrase that received almost no attention in mainstream coverage. The message referenced a, quote, Maine individual. Maine. That word has no meaning in isolation. You do not describe yourself as the main anything unless there are subordinate participants beneath you in a structure. That is hierarchy language. Organizational language. The language of someone who understands that what they are describing has multiple layers. 2 words in a ransom note quietly leaked the operational architecture of the entire crime. Now I want to address something that gets used as an argument against Tommaso Cioni being directly involved in the physical execution of this crime, on his equipment. The suspect on the porch carried a $20 Ozark Trail backpack from Walmart. The kind with reflective safety strips that glow under infrared camera light like a signal flare. A cheap ski mask. A belly band holster strapped in the wrong position over a thick jacket. Firearms expert John Correa stated publicly that no one with a single day of tactical firearms training would wear a holster configured that way. The argument is an AP biology teacher, educated and methodical, would never assemble a crime kit this incompetent. The cheapness is supposed to eliminate the intelligence. Flip that argument over. If you are an educated person planning a crime that you absolutely cannot be connected to, the most dangerous thing you can do is show up competent. Professional gear, night vision, signal jammers, suppressed weapons, on custom-fitted tactical equipment, produces a behavioral profile. FBI profilers would describe the suspect as trained, disciplined, educated, organized. That profile narrows rapidly. It starts pointing at people with professional backgrounds. People like science educators, but if you deliberately assemble the most chaotic, disorganized kit imaginable, the wrong backpack, the reflective strips you should have cut off, the holster that looks like it was put on by someone who is never trained, you build a character. The FBI describes someone impulsive, disorganized, criminally inexperienced. They stop looking at the methodical educator 4 miles away. That is not stupidity on display. That is a deliberate misdirection of the profiling process. The costume worked for a month. No one in law enforcement named Tommaso Cioni as a suspect publicly during that time. And then there is one more document that hasn't received the analytical attention it deserves. In May 2025, 8 months before Nancy Guthrie was taken, Tommaso Cioni signed a durable power of attorney, granting Annie Guthrie control over his financial and property affairs. Legal professionals note this is commonly used in real estate transactions. The document may be completely routine, but the document exists, the timing exists, and Nancy Guthrie's disappearance exists. 3 facts that have never been fully explained in the same sentence. Former News Nation journalist Ashley Banfield reported that a law enforcement source with direct knowledge of the investigation told her Tommaso Cioni could be the prime suspect. Here, the sheriff subsequently made a public statement clearing the family. Federal agents subsequently returned to that same family's home more than 5 times and removed evidence in brown paper bags. These 2 facts cannot both be fully true. Either the clearing statement was accurate and the evidence collection was procedural, or the clearing statement was a calculated public communication designed to reduce the subject's defensive behavior, and the evidence collection was the actual investigation speaking. There is currently a $1 million reward available for information leading to Nancy Guthrie's recovery. Anonymous. Cash. No requirement to testify. No requirement to give your name. I want to speak directly to one person right now. Someone in the Tucson area knows something that didn't make sense at the time. A car that wasn't where it was supposed to be on the night of February 1st. A conversation that was strange. A purchase that felt out of place. A question asked about security cameras or medication or travel schedules. That person is watching something right now. Maybe this video, maybe the news, maybe their own memory. And something is matching up. The DNA doesn't need a confession. The cell towers don't need cooperation. The forensic laboratory in Florida is running profiles against genetic genealogy databases that contain millions of family trees. A second cousin, a grandparent's sibling, a distant relative who spit into a tube for a heritage website 3 years ago. That single thread is the only connection the investigators need. 2 DNA profiles means 2 separate family trees, yet 2 independent genetic pathways into the same database. Whoever left their biology in that house and in that glove is not running from one investigation. They are running from the exponential mathematics of genetic genealogy, a science that has already solved cases that sat cold for 40 years. And there is one more fracture point that no one is talking about. In a 2-person operation, any 2-person operation, the agreement holds as long as both people believe the other won't break. The moment one person begins to suspect the other is calculating survival options, trust collapses. And in the collapse of trust, people make decisions that investigators call gifts. The first person who speaks receives the cooperation agreement. The second person receives the full weight of the prosecution. $1 million, an anonymous reporting. A fracture that has been widening for 6 weeks. Whatever bond held these 2 men together across 19 years of shared stages and shared silences, that bond was built for music. For the timing of a bass note and the response of a drum hit. For the way 2 people learn to anticipate each other so deeply that communication becomes instinct. It was not built for this weight. No bond is. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She has medications that the sheriff described as essential to managing conditions that could become life-threatening without daily dosing. Every day that passes without those medications, every day without her doctors, her bed, her routine, is a day that mathematics works against her. If you have information, any information, no matter how small, high no matter how uncertain, the number is there. The reward is real. The anonymity is guaranteed. Bring Nancy home. And if this video helped you see something you didn't see before, leave a comment below. Tell me what changed for you. Tell me which detail hit the hardest. The algorithm needs to know this case still matters. And so does Nancy Guthrie's family. Subscribe. Share this with someone who's been following this case. And I will be here with the next piece of this when the evidence moves.